When I installed security cameras around my house in Portland, Oregon, I thought I was protecting my family from outside threats. I never imagined the real danger would come from within my own walls, wearing my sister's face and carrying 30 years of shared memories that suddenly felt like lies. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Madison had been living with me for 8 months after her messy divorce from Trevor. What started as temporary help during her transition back to single life had stretched into something more permanent, and honestly, I didn't mind. My 3-bedroom house felt less empty with her laughter echoing through the hallways, and after years of living alone following my own divorce, the company was welcome. The cameras weren't even Madison's idea initially. Our neighborhood had experienced a string of break-ins during the spring, and my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had her entire jewelry collection stolen while she was visiting her daughter in Sacramento. The police report mentioned forced entry through a back door, and suddenly every shadow in my yard felt threatening. I'd researched security systems for weeks, reading reviews and comparing features until my eyes burned. Finally settled on a comprehensive setup with 8 cameras covering every angle of the property: front door, back patio, garage, driveway, and the side entrances that most people forget about. The installation technician, a chatty guy named Rick, who'd been in the business for 15 years, spent an entire Saturday running cables and positioning cameras while explaining the cloud backup system. The beauty of modern security, Rick had said, adjusting the camera angle above my back door, is that everything uploads automatically. Even if someone smashes every camera on the property, the footage is already safe in the cloud. It's like having an invisible witness that never blinks and never forgets. Madison had watched the installation with mild interest, occasionally bringing Rick and me glasses of iced tea while she worked on her laptop. She was between jobs then, taking online courses in digital marketing while collecting unemployment benefits. Her presence during the day meant someone was always home, which actually made me feel more secure about the whole setup. The system worked flawlessly for 3 months. I'd check the app occasionally, more out of curiosity than concern, watching delivery drivers navigate my front steps or observing the neighbor's cat making its daily patrol through my garden. The cameras captured everything in crystal clear detail: Madison leaving for her evening yoga classes, my buddy James stopping by to watch football games, even the raccoon family that had discovered my garbage cans offered better dining than the ones 2 houses down. Everything changed on a Tuesday in October. I'd been traveling for work, a 4-day trip to Denver that stretched into 5 when my flight got canceled due to weather. Madison had volunteered to house sit, which meant feeding my goldfish and making sure the mail didn't pile up. Simple enough tasks that we'd done for each other dozens of times over the years. I returned home Thursday evening to find Madison in the kitchen, stirring a pot of her famous chili while humming along to music playing from her phone. The house smelled incredible, and she'd even picked up fresh flowers for the dining room table. Everything seemed perfectly normal, better than normal actually. She'd obviously put effort into making my homecoming pleasant. "How was Denver?" she asked, not looking up from the stove. "Did the Peterson account finally agree to the new terms?" "Eventually," I replied, setting my suitcase by the stairs. "Took 3 extra meetings, but we got there. Thanks for holding down the fort here. Is everything quiet?" "Boring as always," Madison laughed. "The most exciting thing that happened was Mrs. Chen's grandson practicing skateboard tricks in the street. Oh, and your mailman has been flirting with the new neighbor. I watched him spend 10 minutes at her mailbox yesterday when it should have taken 30 seconds. I checked the security app while unpacking, more out of habit than suspicion. The timeline showed regular activity: Madison coming and going, delivery trucks, the usual suburban rhythm. Nothing seemed out of place, though I noticed there was a gap in the footage from Tuesday afternoon. The camera showed normal activity until about 2:30 p.m., then jumped to 6:15 with no recorded events in between. Technical glitches weren't uncommon. Rick had warned me that power fluctuations or internet connectivity issues could create gaps in the recording. I made a mental note to call the security company in the morning and forgot about it. Friday morning brought the first real red flag. I was reviewing my work emails when I noticed a notification from the security system.
Multiple cameras had gone offline simultaneously on Tuesday at 2:33 p.m., then reconnected at 6:12 p.m. The duration and precise timing struck me as odd. Power outages usually affect the whole house and lasted either minutes or hours, not exactly 3 hours and 39 minutes. I called TechSecure, the monitoring company, and spoke with a technician named Carlos who pulled up my account immediately. Interesting, Carlos said after a few minutes of typing. Your cameras didn't go offline due to power or internet issues. According to our logs, they were manually disconnected from the system. Someone with access to your main control panel switched them off and back on.
The control panel was in my bedroom closet, hidden behind a false wall that Rick had installed for security purposes. Only 2 people knew the location and access code, myself and Madison, who I'd shown during the initial setup in case of emergencies. Could it have been a malfunction in the panel itself? I asked, though something cold was already spreading through my chest. Unlikely, Carlos replied. The logs showed deliberate commands entered with the correct administrative password. Each camera was disabled individually, then reactivated in reverse order. That's not consistent with any technical failure we've seen. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for 20 minutes, staring at the coffee mug Madison had used that morning. She'd already left for a job interview in Beaverton, her interview outfit hanging in the guest room closet the night before. Everything about her behavior seemed normal, even excited about the potential job opportunity. But someone had deliberately disabled my security system for nearly 4 hours on Tuesday, and only 2 people had the access to do it. I spent the afternoon trying to rationalize alternative explanations. Maybe Madison had accidentally triggered something while cleaning. Perhaps there was a logical reason she needed to disable the cameras temporarily, a repair person she'd forgotten to mention, or a delivery that required privacy. My sister wasn't a criminal. She was going through a difficult divorce and career transition, not planning elaborate deceptions. By evening, I'd convinced myself there was an innocent explanation. Madison returned from her interview in high spirits, chattering about the company culture and the hiring manager who seemed impressed with her portfolio. She made dinner while I caught up on emails, our conversation flowing naturally through topics we'd covered thousands of times before. It wasn't until she was loading the dishwasher that I casually mentioned the camera issue. "Oh, that's weird," Madison said, not pausing in her task. "I didn't notice anything wrong with them while you were gone. Maybe it was that storm Tuesday afternoon. The power flickered a few times." "The security company said they were manually turned off," I replied, watching her face carefully. "Someone with the access code disabled them for about 4 hours." Madison's hands stilled for just a moment before continuing to arrange plates in the dishwasher rack. That doesn't make sense. Why would anyone do that? And how would they even know where the panel is? Her confusion seemed genuine, but I'd noticed the brief hesitation. Madison had always been terrible at lying, even as kids when she'd try to blame broken dishes on the cat or claim she'd finished homework that was clearly undone. They were told, the way she avoided eye contact, the slight change in her voice pitch, the fidgeting with whatever she was holding. "I'm sure there's a logical explanation," I said finally. "I'll have the technician check the system next week." "Good idea," Madison agreed, closing the dishwasher with perhaps a bit more force than necessary. Technology can be so glitchy sometimes. But as I watched her retreat to the guest room that night, claiming exhaustion from the job interview, I couldn't shake the feeling that my sister was hiding something significant. The question was whether I really wanted to know what it was. The weekend passed in a strange dance of normalcy that felt increasingly forced. Madison got the job, a marketing coordinator position at a tech startup in downtown Portland, and we celebrated with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. She talked animatedly about her new colleagues and the company's innovative approach to sustainable packaging, but I found myself studying her expressions more than listening to her words. Sunday evening, while Madison was video chatting with her friend Rachel about apartment hunting, I decided to dig deeper into the security footage. The cloud backup system maintained detailed logs that went beyond the basic timeline I'd initially checked. Rick had mentioned during installation that the system tracked not just when cameras went on and offline, but also any attempts to access or delete recorded footage. What I discovered made my blood run cold. According to the advanced logs, someone had accessed the cloud storage system on Wednesday morning, the day after the cameras were disabled, and deleted specific segments of footage.
Not random clips or accidental deletions, but targeted removal of recordings from Tuesday between 2:33 p.m. and 6:12 p.m. across all 8 cameras. The deletion had been executed using my administrative account, but from Madison's laptop, which I recognized by its unique MAC address. The person responsible had been thorough, but not tech-savvy enough to realize that cloud systems maintain deletion logs. Every removed file left a digital fingerprint, showing exactly what was erased, when, and from which device. Madison had carefully eliminated evidence of whatever happened during those missing hours, but she'd inadvertently created a different kind of evidence in the process. My hands shook as I scrolled through the deletion timestamps. Wednesday at 9:47 a.m., exterior cameras. Wednesday at 9:52 a.m., interior hallway camera. Wednesday at 10:15 a.m., back patio camera. Each deletion precisely timed, methodically executed while I was presumably in meetings halfway across the country in Denver.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I called TechSecure again, this time asking for their forensics department. A supervisor named Patricia walked me through the recovery process for deleted cloud files. The good news was that their premium service included a secondary backup system that retained deleted files for 90 days before permanent erasure. The bad news was that accessing this backup required a formal request and would take 48 hours to process. "Is this related to a crime?" Patricia asked. "We can expedite a request if law enforcement is involved." "I'm not sure yet," I replied honestly. "It might just be a family misunderstanding." But even as I said the words, I knew I was lying to myself. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Madison had deliberately disabled my security system. Something had happened during those missing hours that she desperately wanted to hide, and she'd spent considerable time and effort covering her tracks. Monday morning brought fresh complications. Madison left early for her first day at the new job, practically glowing with excitement as she adjusted her blazer and checked her makeup one final time. She looked so genuinely happy that I almost convinced myself I was paranoid, reading sinister motives into innocent actions. Then the mail arrived. Mixed between credit card offers and utility bills was an official-looking envelope from Cascade Property Management, addressed to me but marked Urgent Tenant Violation Notice. My stomach dropped as I opened it, though I couldn't immediately understand why a property management company would be contacting me about tenant violations when I owned my house outright. The letter was dated the previous Tuesday, the same day my cameras went offline. "Dear property owner," it began, "this notice serves to inform you of serious violations occurring at 1247 Elm Street, Portland, OR 97205, during the afternoon hours of October 15th. Our management company received multiple complaints from neighboring tenants regarding excessive noise, unauthorized occupancy, and potential property damage at the above address." My address. Someone had reported my house to a property management company, claiming it was a rental property with problem tenants. The letter detailed complaints about loud music, shouting matches, and possible domestic disturbance occurring between 2:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. on Tuesday. The timing matched the camera outage exactly. I called Cascade Property Management immediately, reaching a harried-sounding woman named Susan who pulled up the complaint file. "The reports came from 3 different neighbors," Susan explained. "They called our emergency hotline about noise violations and possible damage to the rental unit. We have your property listed as a single-family rental managed by, let me see, Madison Torres?" Madison Torres, my sister's married name, which she'd only recently started using again for professional purposes after her divorce. She'd somehow registered my house as a rental property under her management, then fielded complaints about disturbances that occurred while my cameras were conveniently offline. "There's been a mistake," I told Susan. "That's my house, and I'm not renting it to anyone. Madison Torres is my sister." "Oh," Susan's voice shifted from professional to confused. "That's unusual. Our records show she registered the property 6 months ago and has been managing tenant relations. She even provided property tax documents and proof of insurance." 6 months ago?
Madison had been living with me for 8 months, but she'd registered my house as a rental property under her management just 2 months after moving in. This wasn't a recent deception. It was a long-term strategy I was only now discovering. After hanging up with Susan, I sat in my kitchen trying to piece together what I knew. Madison had somehow convinced a property management company that she was managing my house as a rental. On Tuesday, while I was in Denver, something happened that prompted 3 neighbors to call in noise complaints. She'd disabled my security system during the exact time frame of these disturbances, then deleted the footage that would show what actually occurred. The most disturbing part was the systematic nature of it all. This wasn't a moment of panic or a single bad decision. Madison had been planning and executing deceptions for months, using my home and my trust as cover for activities I couldn't yet understand. I spent the afternoon calling neighbors, starting with Mrs. Chen, who was always home and noticed everything that happened on our street. Tuesday, Mrs. Chen said when I asked about any unusual activity. Oh yes, that was terrible. So much shouting from your house and strange cars coming and going. I almost called the police, but then everything got quiet around 6 o'clock. What kind of shouting? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Angry voices, like people fighting, and loud music that went on for hours. Very unlike you, Diane. I was worried something was wrong, but Madison came over Wednesday morning to apologize. She said you'd had some friends over who got too rowdy and that it wouldn't happen again.
Madison had gone door to door Wednesday morning, apologizing to neighbors for disturbances that occurred while she thought all evidence was safely erased from my security system. She'd been managing the fallout from whatever happened Tuesday, cleaning up loose ends while I was stranded in Denver dealing with flight delays. My next call was to Rick, the security technician who'd installed my system. I explained the situation without mentioning family drama, framing it as suspicious activity that might have compromised my security. The manual override you're describing requires physical access to the control panel and knowledge of the administrative codes, Rick said. But there's something else. Your system has a backup battery that maintains basic recording capabilities even when the main power is cut. If someone disabled the cameras through the control panel, the system would still capture audio for about 6 hours on battery power. Audio recordings. Even with the cameras disabled, my security system might have recorded sound from whatever happened during those missing hours. The audio files would be stored separately from video footage and might not have been deleted with the visual recordings. How do I access the audio backup? I asked. You'll need to download data directly from the main control unit. The audio files are stored locally as a security failsafe. I can walk you through the process if you want. 20 minutes later, I was crouched in my bedroom closet with Rick on speakerphone, following his instructions to extract audio files from the control panel's internal storage. The process was more complicated than I'd expected, involving connecting my laptop to the security hub and running diagnostic software that Rick emailed me. The download took 40 minutes and yielded 6 audio files, each labeled with timestamps corresponding to the hours when my cameras were offline. My hands trembled as I opened the first file, recorded between 2:33 p.m. and 3:15 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon. What I heard changed everything I thought I knew about my sister and the life she'd been living under my roof. The first audio file started with the sound of my front door opening, followed by Madison's voice speaking to someone I didn't recognize. "They'll be here any minute," she was saying. "Remember, if anyone asks, you're my roommates, and we're having a small gathering. Keep the conversation away from the neighbors' windows." A male voice responded, gravelly and impatient, "How long do we have?" "At least 4 hours, maybe 5. Diane's flight doesn't land until 8, and she never checks the cameras while traveling for work." My chest tightened as I realized Madison had planned this event around my travel schedule, timing whatever was happening to coincide with my absence. She'd studied my habits, learned my patterns, and used them against me. The audio continued with sounds of multiple people entering my house. I counted at least 6 different voices over the next 20 minutes, some familiar, others completely unknown. Madison was clearly in charge, directing people to different rooms and establishing ground rules for whatever activity was about to unfold. "The kitchen table is for poker only," she announced. "Serious games happen in the basement. Jenny, you're handling the bar setup in the living room. Marcus, did you bring the equipment we discussed?"
Equipment. My blood ran cold as I considered what kind of equipment required this level of secrecy and planning. The audio quality made it difficult to identify specific sounds, but I could hear furniture being moved, objects being set up, and the general commotion of people preparing for some kind of organized event. 25 minutes into the recording, cars began arriving. Madison greeted each newcomer personally, collecting what sounded like entry fees and explaining house rules. The numbers grew quickly. By my count, at least 15 people had entered my house within the first hour, all paying Madison some kind of fee for participation in whatever was happening. The second audio file revealed the true nature of Madison's operation. The sounds were unmistakable once I knew what to listen for: the shuffle of cards, the clink of poker chips, the tension-filled silence of serious gambling, followed by eruptions of celebration or disappointment. Madison had been running an underground gambling operation out of my house, complete with multiple games, a full bar service, and what sounded like substantial money changing hands. Minimum buy-in for Texas Hold'em is $200, Madison's voice cut through the background noise. A high-stakes table requires $500. House takes 10% of each pot, drinks are $20, and we settle all debts before anyone leaves. $200 minimum buy-ins, $500 for high-stakes tables, house cut of 10%. Madison wasn't just hosting friendly poker games, she was operating a sophisticated illegal gambling establishment with serious financial stakes. The scope of her deception was staggering. The third audio file captured the event in full swing. Conversations revealed details that made my situation even worse. Several participants mentioned traveling from Seattle, Vancouver,
Even California specifically for Madison's Tuesday games. This wasn't a one-time event. It was a regular operation with a reputation that drew players from multiple states. Madison runs the cleanest games in the Pacific Northwest, one voice bragged. No drama, no cheating, and the house always pays out fairly. Plus, this location is perfect. Quiet neighborhood, no surveillance, and her sister never bothers us. Her sister never bothers us. Madison had been advertising my absence as a selling point, assuring high-stakes gamblers that they could operate without interference because the property owner was conveniently unaware and frequently traveling. The fourth file contained the confrontation that had prompted the neighbors' complaints. Around 4:30 p.m., an argument erupted between two players over a disputed hand worth several $1,000s. Voices escalated quickly from professional disagreement to personal attacks, with Madison struggling to maintain control. "Take it outside," Madison commanded, but the argument had already spiraled beyond her authority. Someone accused another player of marking cards. The furniture crashed. A woman screamed. The situation devolved into what sounded like a physical altercation involving multiple people. "This is exactly the kind of bullshit that gets operations shut down," a voice shouted over the chaos. "Your security is compromised, Madison. Half the neighborhood probably heard that." "Everyone calm down," Madison's voice cracked with stress. "We handle this internally or nobody gets paid. Jerry, Marcus, get them separated. Jenny, check the windows for neighbors." The fight continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Madison desperately trying to restore order while managing what was clearly a situation spinning out of control. Eventually, the combatants were separated, but several participants demanded their money back and immediate departure. The carefully orchestrated event had collapsed into exactly the kind of dramatic scene that Madison had tried so hard to avoid. The fifth audio file documented the aftermath. Madison spent nearly an hour settling disputes, calculating winnings, and managing the departure of increasingly frustrated gamblers. Several participants expressed concerns about the location's security, with multiple people suggesting that Madison find a new venue for future games. "The neighbors are too close," someone complained, "and this domestic setup makes everyone nervous. You need a warehouse or a commercial space, somewhere with real soundproofing and multiple exit routes." "I'm working on it," Madison replied, though her voice sounded strained. "This location has served us well for 6 months. One bad afternoon doesn't erase our track record." 6 months? Madison had been running this operation for 6 months, essentially since she'd moved in with me.
Her entire sob story about needing temporary help after her divorce was a cover for establishing an illegal gambling business using my house as the venue. Every evening I thought she was at yoga classes or job interviews, she'd been scouting potential players and building her operation. The final audio file captured Madison alone in my house after the last participant had departed. I could hear her moving through the rooms, presumably cleaning up evidence of the afternoon's activities. She made several phone calls, apologizing to regular players and assuring them that future games would be better organized and more secure. Tuesday was a fluke, she told someone. We've had 23 successful sessions without any problems. One dispute doesn't change our reputation. 23 sessions! Madison had been hosting these gambling events twice a month for nearly 6 months, generating substantial income while I unknowingly provided the venue and legitimate cover for her illegal operation. The financial implications alone were staggering. If each session involved 15 players with minimum buy-ins of $200 and Madison was taking 10% of the action plus drink sales, she was potentially earning several $1,000s per event. But the legal implications were even worse. Illegal gambling operations carried serious criminal penalties, and as the property owner, I could potentially be charged as an accomplice, even though I'd been completely unaware of Madison's activities. My house could be seized under asset forfeiture laws. My professional reputation would be destroyed. Everything I'd worked to build could disappear because my sister had decided to use my trust and hospitality as cover for criminal enterprise. The audio files also explained the property management deception. Madison had registered my house as a rental property under her control to create a paper trail that would distance me from any illegal activities. If law enforcement investigated the gambling operation, the official records would show Madison as the property manager dealing with tenant issues rather than the property owner's sister running criminal enterprises out of a family home. As I sat in my closet listening to the final moments of Madison's cleanup, her voice came through clearly as she made one last phone call. "It's handled," she told whoever was on the other end. "Diane will never know what happened. The cameras were down, the footage was deleted, and I've already apologized to the neighbors for the party noise. We're clear for next Tuesday's session." Next Tuesday? Madison was already planning another gambling event, confident that her security measures would prevent me from discovering the truth. She had no idea that audio recordings had survived her careful deletion of video footage, or that her systematic deceptions had left digital trails in property management records and security system logs.
I had evidence of everything: the illegal gambling, the systematic deception, the financial fraud, and Madison's complete betrayal of my trust. The question now was what I intended to do with that knowledge. Madison arrived home that evening radiating the kind of exhausted satisfaction that comes from surviving a challenging first day at a new job. She kicked off her heels in the entryway and launched into detailed stories about her coworkers, the office layout, and her supervisor's expectations for the marketing campaign she'd be managing. I listened from the kitchen, making appropriate responses while internally wrestling with the devastating knowledge I'd gained from the audio recordings. Watching her animated descriptions of mundane office interactions felt surreal when I knew she'd spent months orchestrating elaborate criminal deceptions under this same roof. "The company culture is amazing," Madison continued, pulling leftovers from the refrigerator. "Everyone actually seems to enjoy working there, which is so different from my last job. And the benefits package is incredible: full health coverage, retirement matching, even mental health support." Mental health support. The irony wasn't lost on me as I considered the psychological manipulation Madison had employed to maintain her double life. She'd perfected the art of compartmentalization, seamlessly transitioning between concerned sister recovering from divorce and calculating criminal entrepreneur running illegal gambling operations. I'd spent the afternoon researching my legal options, consulting with a criminal defense attorney named David Morrison, who specialized in white-collar crimes and asset forfeiture cases. His assessment had been sobering but not hopeless, provided I acted quickly and decisively. "The prosecution will focus on whether you had knowledge of the illegal activities," Morrison had explained.
Your sister's systematic efforts to conceal her operation actually work in your favor. They demonstrate that she understood you wouldn't have consented to the gambling if you'd known about it. But knowledge and consent were different legal standards. Now that I definitively knew about Madison's activities, my actions moving forward would determine whether I became an unwitting victim or a willing accomplice. Morrison had been clear about the timeline. I had perhaps 48 hours to report the illegal gambling before my continued silence could be construed as complicity. "How was your day?" Madison asked, settling at the kitchen table with her reheated pasta. "Did you get caught up from the Denver trip?" "Mostly," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I had some interesting conversations with the security company about the camera issues." Madison's fork paused halfway to her mouth, though she recovered quickly. "Oh, did they figure out what caused the glitch?" This was my opportunity to gauge her reaction, to see if she would volunteer any information or continue the deception even when directly confronted with evidence of her activities. "Actually, it wasn't a glitch," I said, looking at her face. "Someone with access to the control panel manually disabled the cameras for several hours, then deleted the footage from the cloud backup." The color drained from Madison's cheeks, though her expression remained carefully neutral. That doesn't make sense. Who would do something like that?" "Someone who needed to hide what was happening in the house while I was away," I continued. "Someone who knew my travel schedule and had access to the administrative codes." Madison set down her fork and looked directly at me for the first time since the conversation began. Something shifted in her demeanor, the pretense of confusion falling away to reveal a calculating intelligence I'd rarely seen from my sister. "What exactly are you suggesting, Diane?" she asked quietly. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you that I know about the gambling operation you've been running out of my house for the past 6 months." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Madison stared at me with an expression I couldn't read, her mind clearly racing through options and calculations. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a resignation that surprised me. "How much do you know?" "Everything. The illegal gambling, the property management registration, the neighbor complaints, the systematic deception. I have audio recordings of your entire operation from Tuesday afternoon." Madison closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, the weight of months of careful planning and execution collapsing in a single moment. When she opened them again, she looked older somehow, as if the strain of maintaining her double life had been physically aging her. "The audio recordings," she said flatly. "I didn't know about those." "Rick mentioned the backup system records sound even when the cameras are disabled. You were thorough with the video footage, but you missed the audio files stored locally on the control panel." Madison nodded slowly, accepting the completeness of her exposure with surprising grace. "How long have you known?" "Since this afternoon. I spent the day listening to 6 hours of recordings and consulting with a criminal defense attorney about my legal exposure." Her eyes sharpened at the mention of an attorney. "Are you planning to turn me in?" The question hung in the air between us, carrying the weight of 30 years of shared history and 8 months of systematic betrayal. Madison had used our relationship as cover for criminal activity that could destroy my life, but she was still my sister, the woman who'd helped me through my own divorce, who'd celebrated my career successes, who'd been my closest confidant through decades of family gatherings and personal milestones. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "My attorney says I have about 48 hours before my silence becomes legally problematic. After that, I become a potential accomplice rather than an unwitting victim." Madison absorbed this information with the same calculating expression she'd worn while managing her gambling operation. "What would it take for you to give me more time?" "Time for what?" "To shut down the operation properly, to return money to players who have credit with the house, to make sure nobody gets hurt when the game stops suddenly." I stared at my sister, recognizing the same manipulative logic she'd used to justify her activities throughout our conversation. Even now, facing complete exposure and potential criminal charges, Madison was trying to negotiate terms that would allow her to control the situation. "You're worried about protecting your criminal associates?" I asked incredulously. "I'm worried about protecting you," Madison replied with surprising intensity. Some of these players have significant money invested in regular games. If the operation disappears overnight without proper settlements, they'll start asking questions about why. Questions that lead to investigations that could implicate you even if you report me now. This was an angle I hadn't considered, and Madison recognized my uncertainty immediately. These aren't casual poker players, Diane. Some of them have traveled from other states specifically for these games. They've made arrangements, taken time off work, and booked hotels. If the operation shuts down abruptly, they'll want explanations. And when they start digging for answers, your name is on all the property records. The manipulation was sophisticated and probably calculated, but it also contained elements of truth that complicated my moral and legal position. Madison had created a situation where my own protection might require maintaining her criminal operation for some period of time, at least long enough to wind it down without creating the kind of dramatic disruption that would attract unwanted attention. "How long would you need?" I asked, hating myself for even considering the question. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Long enough to cancel upcoming games, settle outstanding debts, and give regular players time to find alternative venues. Absolutely not. I'm not allowing 3 more weeks of illegal gambling in my house. Madison leaned forward, her expression earnest but calculated. 1 week then, just enough time to handle this professionally, instead of creating a mess that hurts both of us. I stood up from the table, needing physical distance from my sister's persuasive logic. The entire conversation felt like another layer of manipulation, designed to buy Madison time to either escape consequences or devise new strategies for continuing her operation. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Don't take too long," Madison replied, and for the first time in our conversation, her voice carried an undertone that might have been a threat. This situation is complicated for both of us now. As I walked upstairs to my bedroom, leaving Madison alone in the kitchen with her cold pasta and exposed secrets, I realized that discovering her criminal operation had been only the beginning of my problems. Now I had to navigate the complex legal and personal consequences of that knowledge, while my sister, the person I'd trusted most in the world, had just implied that my cooperation wasn't entirely voluntary. The next morning would bring new complications I couldn't have anticipated, as Madison's carefully constructed criminal enterprise began to unravel in ways that threatened everything I'd worked to build. I woke up Wednesday morning to the sound of Madison's voice drifting up from the kitchen, speaking in hushed but urgent tones on her phone. The conversation had been going on long enough that it pulled me from sleep, and something about her tone suggested this wasn't a casual chat with a friend or colleague. Creeping to the top of the stairs, I caught fragments of what sounded like damage control. Completely contained, sister doesn't suspect anything beyond Tuesday. Need to move the Thursday game to a different location. Thursday game? Madison was still scheduling gambling events, apparently planning to continue her operation despite our confrontation the night before. Either she'd misunderstood the seriousness of her situation, or she was implementing some strategy I hadn't anticipated. I dressed quietly and made my way downstairs, timing my entrance to the kitchen as Madison was ending her call. She looked up with a bright smile that felt aggressively normal after the intensity of our previous evening's conversation. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, already dressed for her second day at the new job. "I made coffee and picked up those blueberry muffins you like from the bakery on Morrison Street." The domestic gesture felt manipulative, another layer of Madison's systematic approach to managing our relationship. She was trying to reset our dynamic, returning to the comfortable routine that had masked her criminal activities for months. "We need to discuss what happens next," I said, declining the muffin she offered. "I've been thinking about that," Madison replied, settling across from me at the kitchen table. "I want to show you something that might change your perspective on the situation." She pulled out her laptop and opened a spreadsheet that detailed months of financial transactions. The scope of her operation was even larger than I'd realized from the audio recordings. Column after column showed dates, participant names, buy-in amounts, house percentages, and net profits that painted a picture of sophisticated business enterprise rather than casual gambling. Over the past 6 months, this operation has generated nearly $48,000 in profit, Madison said, scrolling through the data. That's after paying out winnings, covering operational expenses, and setting aside money for participant settlements. $48,000? The number was staggering, representing more income than many people earned in a full year of legitimate work. Madison had been operating what amounted to a small business with serious financial returns, which explained the professional approach she'd taken to security and customer service. The point isn't the money, I said, though the figure was genuinely shocking. Actually, it is about the money, Madison replied, her voice taking on the same calculating tone from the night before. Specifically, it's about how this money is currently distributed and what happens to those distributions if the operation shuts down suddenly. She clicked to another tab in the spreadsheet, revealing a list of outstanding debts and credits that complicated the simple narrative of shutting down her gambling operation. Several participants had significant money tied up in the system: advance payments for future games, winnings that were being held for tax reasons, and credit arrangements that allowed high-stakes players to participate without carrying large amounts of cash. Marcus Holloway has $12,000 in held winnings from last month's tournament, Madison explained, pointing to specific entries. Jennifer Wong has advanced paid for 6 future sessions. David Park has a credit line of $8,000 that he's been using for 3 months. If I disappear overnight, these people will lose substantial money, and they'll want explanations about why. This was the leverage Madison had hinted at during our confrontation. The idea that her criminal operation had created financial obligations that couldn't be resolved quickly or quietly. She'd built a web of interdependent relationships that made sudden termination complicated and potentially dangerous. You're suggesting that protecting your criminal associates is more important than following the law? I asked. I'm suggesting that following the law stupidly could hurt innocent people and create bigger problems for both of us, Madison replied. These aren't hardened criminals, Diane. They're professionals with disposable income who enjoy high-stakes poker. A software engineer from Google, a dentist from Vancouver, a retired teacher who won the lottery. They don't deserve to lose money because you discovered something you weren't supposed to know. The moral complexity of Madison's argument was infuriating because it contained elements of truth. Her gambling operation wasn't a violent criminal enterprise preying on vulnerable people. It was providing entertainment services to affluent adults who could afford the stakes. The participants were willing customers, not victims, and they had legitimate financial interests that would be harmed by abrupt termination. But those moral complications didn't change the legal reality that Madison was operating an illegal business out of my house, exposing me to serious criminal liability and potential asset forfeiture. Show me the settlement plan, I said. Madison clicked to a third spreadsheet tab that outlined her proposed wind-down strategy. She'd calculated exactly how much money was needed to settle all outstanding obligations, identified alternative venues where regular participants could continue their games, and estimated the timeline required to transition the operation responsibly. The total settlement cost is approximately $15,000, she explained. I have $11,000 in liquid assets that I can access immediately. The remaining $4,000 would come from the house percentage of this Thursday's game and one final session next Tuesday. 2 more gambling events? Madison was asking me to knowingly allow 2 additional illegal gambling sessions in my house so she could generate the money needed to shut down
Operation responsibly. The request was simultaneously reasonable and completely unacceptable. What guarantee do I have that you'll actually shut down after those 2 games? I asked. Madison reached into her purse and pulled out a notarized document that she slid across the table. Legal agreement transferring my interest in the operation to a group of regular participants who are setting up a permanent venue in an industrial district warehouse. After next Tuesday, the games move to their location permanently, and I'm completely out of the business. The document appeared legitimate, complete with official letterhead from a law firm I recognized and signatures from multiple parties. Madison had been planning her exit strategy for weeks, possibly months, long before I'd discovered her activities. This entire conversation was a carefully orchestrated presentation designed to convince me that cooperating with her timeline was the most logical course of action.
You've been planning to shut down regardless of whether I found out, I realized. The operation was always intended to be temporary, Madison admitted. 6 months to generate enough capital to restart my life after the divorce, then transition to legitimate business ventures. Your discovery just accelerated the timeline slightly. The revelation reframed everything I thought I understood about Madison's motivations and planning. She hadn't been building a long-term criminal enterprise, she'd been executing a specific financial strategy with predetermined endpoints. Her systematic approach to security and record-keeping wasn't paranoia, it was professional planning for an operation she'd always intended to terminate. "Why didn't you just ask me for money if you needed capital?" I asked. Madison's expression softened for the first time since our confrontation began. "Because asking for $20,000 from your sister feels like charity. Earning $48,000 through your own skills and effort feels like independence." For a moment, I glimpsed the emotional logic that had driven Madison's deceptions. Her gambling operation wasn't just about money, it was about agency and self-determination during a period when her life had been completely disrupted by divorce and career uncertainty. She'd chosen criminal enterprise over family charity because it allowed her to maintain dignity and control. But understanding her motivations didn't resolve my legal and moral dilemma. Madison was asking me to become a conscious participant in illegal gambling, even if only temporarily, to facilitate the responsible termination of her criminal operation. The choice was between reporting her immediately and becoming potentially complicit in 2 additional crimes. My phone buzzed with a text message from David Morrison, my attorney. "Have you made a decision about reporting? Time sensitive for your legal protection." Madison noticed me reading the message. "Thursday and Tuesday," she said quietly. "2 games, then it's over forever. You'll never have to worry about this again, and nobody gets hurt financially." I stared at my sister across the kitchen table, weighing the competing pressures of legal self-protection, moral obligation, and family loyalty. Whatever decision I made in the next few hours would determine not just Madison's future, but my own relationship with the law and with my conscience. The sound of a car pulling into my driveway interrupted my internal deliberation. Through the kitchen window, I could see a black sedan with tinted windows parking behind Madison's car, effectively blocking her vehicle in the driveway. Madison followed my gaze to the window, and I watched the color drain from her face as she recognized the vehicle. Her confident demeanor evaporated instantly, replaced by something that looked like genuine fear. "We need to get away from the windows," she whispered urgently, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the hallway. "Now." "Who is that?" I demanded, but Madison was already moving, her earlier composure completely shattered. 2 men emerged from the sedan, both wearing expensive suits that couldn't quite conceal the bulges of concealed weapons. They moved with the kind of purposeful coordination that suggested professional training, scanning the neighborhood before approaching my front door. "Marcus Holloway," Madison said, her voice barely audible, "and his business partner, Vincent Crane." The names meant nothing to me initially, but then I remembered Madison's spreadsheet. Marcus Holloway was the participant with $12,000 in held winnings, one of the high-stakes players she'd mentioned during our morning conversation. "Why does a software engineer from Google need armed bodyguards?" I asked. Madison's laugh held no humor. "Marcus doesn't work for Google. I may have simplified some details about my clientele when I was trying to convince you to cooperate." The doorbell rang, followed immediately by heavy knocking that echoed through the house with unmistakable authority. These men weren't making a social visit or politely requesting a conversation.
"Madison Torres," a voice called through the door. "We know you're inside. We need to discuss some irregularities in your books." Irregularities in her books? The phrase suggested that Madison's financial spreadsheets might not have been as accurate as she'd presented, or that her exit strategy had created problems she hadn't anticipated. "What irregularities?" I whispered. Madison was already pulling out her phone, frantically scrolling through messages and missed calls. "I've been getting texts since yesterday from participants asking about their money. Word is spreading that the operation might be shutting down, and people are demanding immediate settlement of their accounts. You told me you had everything under control." I thought I did, Madison replied, her fingers flying across her phone screen. But someone leaked information about Tuesday's disruption, and now everyone thinks the operation is compromised. They want their money back immediately, not according to my timeline. The knocking intensified, accompanied by voices discussing alternative entry methods. Through the front window, I could see one of the men walking around the perimeter of my house, presumably looking for unlocked doors or windows. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. Madison showed me her phone screen, which displayed a running tally of withdrawal requests that had come in over the past 18 hours. The number was approaching $35,000, far more than the $15,000 she'd claimed were needed for settlements. "People are panicking," she explained. "When high-stakes gamblers think an operation is about to be raided or shut down, they want immediate access to their money. It's creating a run on the bank, basically." A run on the bank? Madison had been operating her gambling business like a financial institution, holding participants' money and paying out winnings on credit. But unlike legitimate banks, she didn't have federal insurance or regulatory oversight to manage liquidity crises. "Madison," the voice outside grew more insistent, "we're not leaving until we have a conversation. You can make this easy or difficult." "What do they want?" I asked. "Marcus has been trying to withdraw his $12,000 since Monday," Madison replied. "I told him the money was tied up in operational expenses and would be available after this week's games. But if the operation is shutting down completely, he wants everything immediately." "Do you have his money?" Madison's silence answered my question more clearly than words. She'd been using participants' held winnings to fund operational expenses and generate new profits, creating a classic Ponzi-style financial structure that required continuous new money to pay existing obligations. "How much of the participants' money do you actually have?" I pressed. "About $18,000 in liquid assets," Madison admitted. "The rest is tied up in equipment, venue deposits for future games, and operational loans I made to keep the business running during slow periods." The math was devastating. Madison owed at least $35,000 to participants who were demanding immediate payment, but she only had access to $18,000. Her gambling operation wasn't just illegal, it was effectively bankrupt. My phone rang, and David Morrison's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately, hoping my attorney might have advice for this rapidly deteriorating situation. "Diane, I've been researching your sister's operation based on the information you provided," Morrison said without preamble. "There are some complications we need to discuss immediately." "I'm listening," I replied, moving further away from the windows where the men outside continued their increasingly aggressive attempts to gain entry. Federal gambling operations of this scale typically attract attention from multiple law enforcement agencies. The FBI has a task force that specifically targets interstate gambling networks, and your sister's operation appears to meet their criteria for federal prosecution. Federal prosecution? The stakes of my situation had just escalated beyond local criminal charges to potentially federal crimes with much more serious penalties. "There's more," Morrison continued. "I've been checking property records and financial databases. Your house has been flagged by FinCEN as a location of interest due to unusual cash transaction patterns reported by local banks." FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Madison's gambling operation had generated enough cash flow to trigger federal money laundering investigations. My house wasn't just the venue for illegal gambling, it was now officially under federal financial surveillance.
What does that mean for me? I asked. It means that any delay in reporting what you know could be interpreted as participation in a money laundering conspiracy. We're not talking about 48 hours anymore, Diane. We're talking about hours, possibly minutes. The men outside had apparently grown tired of waiting for a response. I heard the distinct sound of tools being applied to my back door, followed by the scrape of metal against wood that suggested they were attempting to force entry. "They're trying to break in," I told Morrison. "Who's trying to break in?" "Participants in Madison's gambling operation. They want their money back, and they're not taking no for an answer." Morrison's tone shifted to urgent alarm.
You need to call 911 immediately. Do not attempt to handle this situation yourself. These kinds of financial disputes can turn violent very quickly. I looked at Madison, who was still frantically texting on her phone, apparently trying to negotiate with multiple angry participants simultaneously. Her carefully constructed criminal enterprise was collapsing in real time, and the collapse was happening inside my house with armed men attempting to force entry. If I call 911, the police will discover everything, I said to Morrison. If you don't call 911, you might not survive to face criminal charges, he replied bluntly. Make the call, Diane, right now. The sound of splintering wood came from the direction of my back door. Madison looked up from her phone with genuine terror in her eyes. They're inside, she whispered. Heavy footsteps moved through my house with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Madison grabbed my arm again, pulling me toward the front door. We have to leave, she said urgently, right now, before they find us. But as we reached the front hallway, the doorknob turned, and the front door opened to reveal a third man I hadn't seen before. He was smaller than the other two, but carried himself with an authority that suggested he was in charge of whatever was happening. Going somewhere, ladies? He asked, with a smile that held no warmth. Madison and I were trapped in my own house, surrounded by armed men, demanding money that didn't exist, while federal investigators were apparently already monitoring the property for financial crimes. The situation had spiraled completely beyond anything I could have imagined when I first discovered the gap in my security footage. Vincent, Madison said, her voice carefully controlled despite the fear in her eyes. I wasn't expecting you until Thursday. Plans changed, Vincent replied, stepping into my entryway uninvited. We need to discuss some discrepancies in your accounting, and we need to discuss them right now. Vincent stepped fully into my entryway, his two associates flanking him as they systematically blocked all potential exits. The smaller man's calm demeanor was somehow more terrifying than his companion's obvious physical intimidation. He surveyed my house with the practiced eye of someone evaluating assets. Nice place, Vincent said, conversationally. Worth about $400,000, according to public records. Should be more than enough to cover Madison's outstanding obligations. My outstanding obligations. The implication was clear. Vincent intended to hold me financially responsible for Madison's gambling debts, using my house as collateral for money I'd never agreed to guarantee. Diane has nothing to do with this, Madison said, finding her voice despite the obvious fear. The operation is my responsibility. Any debts are mine alone. Vincent laughed, but the sound held no amusement. That's not how liability works when you're operating out of someone else's property, Madison. Your sister provided the venue, the security, the legitimate cover that made this operation possible. That makes her a business partner, whether she admits it or not. The legal logic was twisted, but not entirely without foundation. I'd unknowingly provided material support for Madison's criminal enterprise, and now that support was being used to justify holding me responsible for its financial obligations. How much does she owe? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Vincent pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be detailed financial records. $37,460 in direct participant withdrawals. Another $12,000 in operational expenses that were supposed to be covered by house percentages from future games. And approximately $8,000 in penalty fees for the disruption and early termination. $57,000. The figure was staggering, representing more than a year of my take-home income, and significantly more than Madison had ever indicated was involved in her operation. I don't have that kind of money, I said. But you have this house, Vincent replied, gesturing around my entryway. And houses can be refinanced, sold, or transferred to cover outstanding debts. We're reasonable people. We'll work with you on a payment plan. The casual way he discussed seizing my house suggested this wasn't Vincent's first experience with collecting gambling debts from reluctant guarantors. He'd clearly dealt with similar situations before and had developed systematic approaches to extract payment from people who'd never agreed to be financially responsible.
My phone was still connected to David Morrison, and I could hear him speaking urgently on the other end of the line. "Diane, are you still there?" Morrison's voice was tight with concern.
"I'm here," I replied quietly. "I heard enough of that conversation to understand what's happening. Do not agree to any financial arrangements, do not sign any documents, and call 911 immediately." Vincent noticed my phone conversation and extended his hand expectantly. "Let's keep this discussion private," he said. I hesitated, but Marcus stepped forward with clear intent to take the phone by force if necessary. I ended the call and handed over the device, hoping Morrison had heard enough to understand the urgency of the situation. "Now then," Vincent continued, pocketing my phone, "let's discuss how we're going to resolve this situation quickly and professionally." Madison spoke up again, her voice steadier than before. "The participants knew the risks when they joined the operation. Gambling debts aren't legally enforceable, and you can't hold my sister responsible for business decisions she wasn't involved in making." "That might be true in a courtroom," Vincent replied, "but we're not in a courtroom. We're in a house that's been used for 6 months to facilitate illegal gambling, and we're discussing practical solutions to practical problems." The threat implicit in his words was becoming explicit. Vincent wasn't interested in legal remedies or legitimate debt collection. He was prepared to use extortion and intimidation to recover money his associates had lost in Madison's operation. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Vincent set his tablet on my kitchen counter and pulled up what appeared to be a prepared contract. "Simple equity transfer. You sign over 40% ownership of this property to a holding company we control. That gives us security for the outstanding debt, while allowing you to continue living here and making payments according to an agreed schedule." 40% ownership of my house? Vincent was essentially demanding that I mortgage my home to cover Madison's gambling debts, creating a financial arrangement that would bind me to his organization indefinitely. "And if I refuse?" Vincent's smile grew colder. "Then we explore alternative collection methods. Your sister's operation generated substantial documentation about participants, locations, financial flows, and operational security. That information could be valuable to various law enforcement agencies investigating illegal gambling in the Pacific Northwest." He was threatening to turn Madison over to law enforcement while simultaneously demanding that I pay her debts. The contradiction was brazen, but it revealed the extent of Vincent's leverage. He could destroy both of us legally while also demanding financial compensation for his losses. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Vincent set his tablet on my kitchen counter and pulled up what appeared to be a prepared contract. "Simple equity transfer. You sign over 40% ownership of this property to a holding company we control. That gives us security for the outstanding debt, while allowing you to continue living here and making payments according to an agreed schedule." 40% ownership of my house? Vincent was essentially demanding that I mortgage my home to cover Madison's gambling debts, creating a financial arrangement that would bind me to his organization indefinitely. "And if I refuse?" Vincent's smile grew colder. "Then we explore alternative collection methods. Your sister's operation generated substantial documentation about participants, locations, financial flows, and operational security. That information could be valuable to various law enforcement agencies investigating illegal gambling in the Pacific Northwest." He was threatening to turn Madison over to law enforcement while simultaneously demanding that I pay her debts. The contradiction was brazen, but it revealed the extent of Vincent's leverage. He could destroy both of us legally while also demanding financial compensation for his losses. "You're asking me to choose between bankruptcy," I said. "I'm asking you to choose between a reasonable business arrangement and unreasonable consequences for everyone involved," Vincent corrected. "This can end with a simple signature, or it can end with federal investigations, asset seizures, and criminal prosecutions that destroy multiple lives." The sound of sirens in the distance interrupted our conversation. Vincent's expression darkened as he recognized the approaching police cars, while Madison looked at me with a mixture of hope and accusation. "You called the police," Vincent said, no longer bothering with conversational pleasantries. "My attorney called them," I replied.
which was technically true, even though Morrison had instructed me to make the call myself. Vincent gestured to his associates, who immediately moved toward the back of my house where they'd forced entry. Their retreat was swift and professional, suggesting they'd planned escape routes before entering the property. "This isn't over," Vincent told me as he headed toward the front door. "Madison owes money to people who don't forget debts, and you provided the venue that made those debts possible. We'll be in touch about alternative arrangements." The three men disappeared as quickly as they'd arrived, leaving through my backyard just as police cars pulled into my driveway. Within minutes, my house was filled with uniformed officers taking statements and documenting evidence of the forced entry. Detective Sarah Walsh, a 20-year veteran of Portland Police who specialized in organized crime, took charge of the investigation. Her questions were thorough and professional, but I could see her building a mental picture of criminal activities that extended far beyond simple breaking and entering. "So your sister was operating an illegal gambling business out of your house for 6 months, and you discovered this exactly?" Detective Walsh asked. I explained about the security footage, the audio recordings, and the systematic deception, while Madison sat silently on my couch with her head in her hands. Each detail I provided added another layer to what was clearly becoming a complex criminal investigation. "We'll need to examine all your financial records, property documents, and security system data," Detective Walsh informed me. "This appears to be part of a larger investigation into organized gambling operations with interstate connections." Over the following weeks, the full scope of Madison's deception emerged through federal and local investigations. Her gambling operation had been one of several coordinated enterprises run by Vincent's organization, generating millions of dollars across multiple states. Madison hadn't been an independent entrepreneur. She'd been a low-level operator in a sophisticated criminal network. The legal proceedings took 8 months to resolve. Madison pleaded guilty to operating in illegal gambling and conspiracy charges, receiving 3 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. Vincent and his associates were arrested 2 weeks after the confrontation at my house, charged with racketeering, extortion, and money laundering across multiple jurisdictions. My own legal situation was resolved more favorably. David Morrison successfully argued that I'd been an unwitting victim of Madison's deception and had acted responsibly by reporting the criminal activity as soon as I discovered it. The federal prosecutors agreed not to pursue charges against me in exchange for my cooperation with their investigation into Vincent's organization. But the financial consequences were severe. My house was placed under federal asset forfeiture procedures for 4 months while investigators traced money flows and determined what property had been purchased with criminal proceeds. Although I eventually retained ownership, the legal fees and property damage from the investigation cost me nearly $15,000. Madison and I haven't spoken since her sentencing hearing. She wrote me several letters from federal prison, attempting to explain her motivations and apologize for the consequences of her actions. I read the first 2 letters but couldn't bring myself to respond. Some betrayals cut too deep for reconciliation, especially when they involve systematic deception that destroys fundamental trust.
The security cameras are still installed around my house, but I check them obsessively now, haunted by the knowledge that the greatest threats to my safety and security came from within my own family. The gaps in surveillance that once seemed like minor technical glitches now feel like harbingers of potential disasters I might not recognize until they've already destroyed everything I've worked to build. Mrs. Chen still waves from her garden when I check the mail, but she's never asked about Madison's absence or the police cars that filled our quiet street for weeks during the investigation. Some conversations are too complicated for neighborly small talk, and some secrets leave permanent shadows even after they've been exposed to the light. When people ask me now about family loyalty and the obligations we owe to siblings, I tell them about the difference between supporting someone through difficult times and enabling them to use your trust as a weapon against you. Madison didn't just betray me, she weaponized 30 years of shared history and unconditional love to facilitate criminal activities that could have destroyed both our lives. The hardest lesson from this experience wasn't about security systems or legal liability. It was learning that the people closest to us are sometimes the most dangerous, precisely because their access to our lives and trust allows them to cause damage that strangers never could.
Madison knew my habits, my vulnerabilities, my travel schedule, and my unconditional loyalty to family. She used all of that knowledge against me with calculated precision. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never installed those security cameras, if the break-ins in our neighborhood hadn't prompted me to document everything that happened on my property. Madison's operation might have continued indefinitely, with me remaining blissfully unaware of the criminal enterprise operating under my roof. But then I remember Vincent's threats and the federal investigations, and I realized that ignorance wouldn't have protected me from the consequences of Madison's choices. Eventually, her illegal gambling operation would have collapsed under its own contradictions, and I would have faced the same legal and financial jeopardy without the evidence needed to prove my innocence. The security footage that Madison thought she'd successfully deleted became the foundation of my legal defense and the proof that I'd acted in good faith once I discovered the truth. In the end, her betrayal was documented and preserved by the very system she'd tried so hard to circumvent. Trust, once broken by systematic deception, can never be fully repaired. But surveillance systems, properly maintained and monitored, provide a different kind of security. Protection not just from external threats, but from the people we love who might choose to abuse our trust in ways we never thought possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.